I called my father 19 times between February and September. He picked up twice. The second time was the last time. 2 days after that call, my sister sent me a text from her own number, not his. Dad has asked me to handle all communications going forward. Please respect his need for rest. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down on my workbench and stared at the wall for a while. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday in October, I drove the 3 hours from Halifax to Tatamagouche on the Trans-Canada and the 104. I had a bag with me. 2 library books my father had been waiting on, a topographic atlas of the Maritimes, a new one from the University Press, and a paperback history of the Cabot Trail. He'd asked about both in April. In one of the 2 calls he actually answered. My brother-in-law opened the door, not wide, just enough to stand in the gap. "Your father isn't up to visitors today," he said. "I'm not a visitor," I said. "I'm his son." He did this thing with his face, a patience that wasn't patience. He had a rough night, he's resting. Behind him I could hear the television. A nature documentary. My father hated nature documentaries. He always said they were what people watched when they'd stopped being curious about the actual world outside. "Tell him I'm here," I said. "I don't think that's a good idea right now." I looked past him into the front hall. The coat rack was wrong. His peacoat was gone. The row of gardening boots along the baseboard, gone too. There was a cardboard box near the stairs, half-taped, one flap bent back on itself. "Okay," I said. I put the books down on the porch railing. I walked back to the truck. I heard the books hit something before I reached the end of the driveway. The bottom of the recycling bin, from the sound of it. I sat in the truck for a few minutes. The October light was flat, the kind that makes everything look like it's already a photograph of itself. I looked at the house. The curtains in my father's study were drawn. They had been drawn both times I'd driven past in the last 3 months. He'd kept those curtains open every single day for as long as I could remember. Said he needed to see the yard to think. I pulled out and headed back toward the 104. Before the on-ramp, I stopped at the Tim Hortons in Truro, sat in the parking lot, and made 2 calls. One to my daughter. One to a number I'd looked up 3 times in the past month and never dialed. The second call was to Adult Protection Services, Colchester County. I need to explain something about my father before any of the rest of this makes sense. He taught geography at Colchester District High School for 31 years. Not the kind of teaching where you hand out worksheets and wait for the bell. The kind where he drove students out to the Cobequid Hills on a Wednesday afternoon so they could read a topographic map in actual fog. He kept every map he'd ever used, filed by region, by scale, by date. His study had a full wall of flat map drawers, the wide kind that architects use, and he knew where everything was without looking. When I was 12, he took me on a 3-day backpacking trip along the Blue Mountain Trail. On the second day, we got turned around in the fog, near the North Fork. He had the map and a compass and 30 years of field experience. We were never truly lost, but we were turned around, and it took 3 hours to find the logging road we'd come in on. And when we finally broke out of the tree line, I sat down on a rock and cried with pure relief. My father sat down next to me, and very quietly cried too. On the drive home, he said, "Every map has edges. The skill is knowing you're near one before you go off it." I kept that map, folded wrong, creased at the North Fork, a smudge of mud on the legend that never quite came out. It's been in my toolbox for 40 years, not because I need it, because it's the kind of thing you keep. In February, 14 months after his TIA, my father called me from his own phone on a Thursday afternoon. We talked for about 20 minutes. He was slower than he used to be. The TIA had affected his word retrieval, his neurologist explained. He'd start a sentence, and sometimes have to back up and find another route to what he meant. But his thinking was intact. His memory was intact. He was the same person, just moving more carefully through language. Near the end of the call, he asked me something. "Gareth, do you still have that old map? The Blue Mountain one?" I told him I did. He said good, then we moved on. I didn't understand why he'd asked. I thought about it after I hung up, then let it go. I wrote it in my field notebook. I've kept one since my first engineering job in the early 90s. Green cover, wire-bound, same brand for 30 years. I use them for site measurements, material calculations, anything I need to not forget. I wrote the date and what he'd said about the map, and I underlined it twice, the way I do when something doesn't fit into an obvious category. That was the last call where I heard his voice directly. My daughter Phoebe is 26. She's finishing her nursing degree at Dalhousie. She's sharper than I am in most of the ways that matter in a situation like this. She called me 2 nights after I got turned away at my father's porch, late, after a clinical shift. Open Instagram, she said. Go to your sister's page. My sister had posted a photo 4 days earlier. My father was sitting in the recliner in the living room, hands folded, smiling at the camera. My sister had her arm around him. Zoom in on his wrists, Phoebe said. I spread my fingers on the screen. His sleeves, a long-sleeved flannel shirt, warm for October indoors, had shifted slightly at the cuffs. On his right wrist, just above the cuff line, there was a reddened mark. The skin was chafed, not bruised. A line, not a point. What am I looking at? I said. Phoebe was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, she used the voice I'd heard her use with difficult families on her clinical rotations. The voice that means, pay attention to every word. I can't say for certain from a photo. It could be irritation from the heart rate monitor strap they sent him home with. It might not be. She paused. Look at his neck. Look at how he's sitting. I looked. My father had always been lean, but this was different. The hollow above his collarbone was deep in a way it hadn't been in the Christmas photo. He was sitting very straight, not relaxed. His hands weren't just folded, they were holding each other. I pulled up Christmas and held both screens side by side. I need some air, I said. I know, said Phoebe. The next morning I drove to Marguerite's house. She'd lived next to my father for 18 years. She was a retired school librarian, 73, the kind of person who notices everything and keeps her own counsel until she decides it's time to speak. I asked her directly. She told me she hadn't seen my father in the backyard since early June. He used to come out every morning, she said. He had a vegetable garden along the east fence, and he tended it the way he graded papers, methodically, with full attention. He'd wave at her over the fence, and sometimes they'd talk for 20 minutes about whatever was in the news. In June it stopped. She'd knocked on the door twice. The first time my brother-in-law answered and said my father was resting. The second time, he walked all the way out to the sidewalk, not to the porch, to the sidewalk, and told her very calmly to mind her own business. I called adult protection in August, she said. They sent someone. Your father told them he was fine. I went still, and nothing happened. She nodded slowly. Gareth, I know what I saw through that screen door before your brother-in-law put himself in front of it. But if your father tells them he's fine, and he has legal capacity, there's nothing they can do. She paused. What I keep asking myself is why he said it. That was the question. I drove home with it, and I didn't sleep. That evening I went on the Nova Scotia Land Registry website. Force of habit from years of checking property assessments for job sites. I ran the address on my father's street. The house was listed. Residential, active, listed 6 weeks ago. 4 bedrooms, the woodworking shop at the back. The listing agent was my brother-in-law. He'd gotten his real estate license in 2022. I hadn't known that. The listing description said the homeowner was transitioning to a care facility, and the family was motivated for a quick sale. The photos showed the interior cleared out, the map drawers in the study gone, the wall bare, the bookshelves in the hallway stripped. Those cardboard boxes near the stairs weren't packing boxes coming in. They were my father's life going out. I opened my field notebook and wrote one line. House listed. Father never mentioned. Who authorized this? Then I went back through my notes from the previous 8 months and counted. 19 calls. 3 voicemails that got responses, all from my sister's phone, all versions of the same message. 2 texts returned, 1 visit turned away. The last call my father actually answered. February, asked about the map. I wrote all of it down. Dates, durations, responses. The way I'd document a structural problem on a job site. Not because I was trying to build a case, but because I'm an engineer, and when something doesn't add up, you put it on paper before you try to make sense of it. When I called adult protection the second time, I read from the notebook. The intake worker was professional. She asked good questions. At the end she said, Sir, I want you to understand, if your father tells our investigator he's safe and he's there by choice, we can't compel anything. He has the right to make his own decisions. I understand that, I said. I'm not asking you to compel anything. I'm asking you to give him a chance to be heard when my sister isn't in the same room. We can schedule a home visit within 10 business days. I wrote the date in the notebook. Then I wrote, Can't guarantee she won't be there. 8 days later, a constable with the Colchester County Detachment called me. His name was Angus. We'd grown up in the same county, gone to different high schools, played in the same junior hockey league for 2 years. Not close friends, but the kind of people who know each other, the way you know people in small counties. He'd been assigned to accompany the adult protection worker. He called me the night before as a professional courtesy. "You can't be there," he said. "You know that." "I know. And I can't search anything, I can observe what's in plain view." "I know, Angus." There was a pause. "Is there anything specific you want me to look for?" I told him about the photo, the mark on my father's wrist. I told him I couldn't prove what it was. He said, "Okay, I'll look." I hung up. I thought about something. Angus's grandmother had died in the spring of 2019. My father had attended her funeral. She'd lived 3 streets over and he'd known her from the Legion. He'd brought a casserole to the house after. I didn't know why I was thinking about it. I wrote it down in the notebook anyway. Angus called me the next evening. I picked up on the first ring. He talked for about 12 minutes. I didn't interrupt. The house was spotless. Fresh flowers on the kitchen table. A tray of Nanaimo bars on the counter, covered in plastic wrap, the kind you put out when you're expecting someone. My sister had been notified per protocol and had 90 minutes. My father was in the recliner in the living room, hair combed, wearing a long-sleeved flannel shirt buttoned to both wrists. He answered every question clearly. Was he safe? Yes. Did he feel prevented from contacting anyone? No. Was he happy with his living situation? Yes. My sister sat on the sofa across from him for the entire interview, not interfering, just present. He looked thinner, Angus said, but he wasn't in distress, not that I could see. I closed my eyes. "Gareth," Angus said. When we were leaving, he shook my hand, and he said completely normally, just as something you'd say, "Give my regards to your grandmother, Angus. She always made the best oatcakes in the county." I sat up straight. Angus's grandmother died in 2019. My father had been to her funeral. My father had stood in her kitchen while Angus's family received visitors. Angus said very quietly, "Your father is not confused. He knew exactly who I was, he knew where we were, and he knows that woman has been dead for 7 years. He said it on purpose." I picked up my pen. I wrote, "He's still there. He's still trying." Phoebe came over the next morning. We sat at the kitchen table, both phones out, the notebook open between us. "The Taya affected his word retrieval and his processing speed," she said. "He talks slower, that's real. But his long-term memory, his orientation, his social awareness, those are intact. He knew Angus, he knew Angus's grandmother, he knew she was dead. He wasn't confused." She paused. "He was performing." I sat with that. "He couldn't say help me," she said. She was right there on the sofa. So he said the thing that only someone who knew him would catch. He set a signal and aimed it at the one person in the room who had a reason to hear it. I went to the garage. On the shelf behind the circuit tester and the extra blueprints, there was a flat map tube, cardboard, sealed at both ends with electrical tape. I opened it. The Blue Mountain Trail map was inside, folded wrong, the old mud smudge still on the legend. I stood there holding it. "He asked about the map in February," I said when I came back. "That was the last real call." Phoebe looked at me. "I have it," I said. "I'm not using it." "Why not?" "Because if I walk into that house without being invited, I become everything she says I am, and Dad pays for that." 11 days later, a registered letter arrived at the post office. I had to sign for it. It was from a law firm in Truro. The letterhead was crisp, and the language was precise, and the message was simple. My sister had filed a petition for full legal guardianship under Nova Scotia's Adult Capacity and Decision-Making Act. The grounds: cognitive impairment following a transient ischemic attack, inability to independently manage financial affairs, and, I read this 3 times, the demonstrated failure of other family members to maintain meaningful contact or participation in the subject's care over the preceding 8 months. 8 months of unanswered calls, 8 months of texts bounced back through her phone, 8 months of driving 3 hours and being told my father was resting. And now those 8 months were being submitted to a court as evidence that I had chosen to be absent. The hearing was set for 10 weeks out. I knew enough about the Adult Capacity Act to understand what full guardianship meant. It wasn't a shared arrangement. It wasn't advisory. It meant my father would lose the legal right to decide where he lived. who he spoke to, what he signed. It meant my sister could sell the house, liquidate the RRSP, place him in a facility, and manage every dollar of his CPP and pension without his input. It meant I handle all communications going forward would become permanent and court-sanctioned. The physician's affidavit was from a doctor my father had seen once at a walk-in clinic. One appointment, one signature. I opened the field notebook. I wrote 10 weeks. She doesn't need to win. She just needs me to stay quiet. I met my sister at the Tim Hortons on College Road. I picked it because it was public, and because I didn't trust what I might say anywhere private. She was already there when I arrived, coffee in hand, looking at me with the exhausted patience of a person doing everyone a favor by continuing to explain things. I went through the notebook the way I'd walk through a punch list on a job site. Methodical. No heat. I told her I wanted to see my father. She could be present if she wanted. I just wanted to see him. She reached into her bag and took out her phone. She tapped the screen and held it across the table. Speaker up. My father's voice, clear and steady. I'm doing fine, son. Don't worry about me. I recognized his voice in half a second. Every vowel, every pause. Then I said, "What date is that recording from?" She didn't answer right away. "He mentions the Leafs game," I said. "I can hear it in the background. The Leafs haven't played on a weeknight since March." She pulled the phone back. The silence between us lasted about 4 seconds. Long enough. She stood up. She left a toonie on the table for her coffee. At the door, she turned back. "You know what your problem is? You were always too busy to show up when it mattered. Don't try to make that Dad's problem now." She left. I sat there with my cold coffee and the field notebook open on the table and her toonie between us. 3 days later, Marguerite called me. She got the Colchester Bulletin in the mail, the print edition, which she still subscribed to and actually read cover to cover on Thursday afternoons. She told me there was something in the community notices I needed to hear. She read it to me. The Colchester District High School Retired Staff Association was holding its annual Lifetime Service Recognition Evening. Dinner, remarks from the principal, presentation of a Community Appreciation Award. The recipient, selected by the Alumni Committee, was a retired geography teacher who had served the school for over 3 decades. The event was in 4 weeks. The school gymnasium, 80 guests, live streamed on the school's Facebook page. And at the end of the notice, in the guest list, the recipient's family would be in attendance, and the award would be presented by the recipient's daughter. I asked Marguerite to read it again. She did. I set the phone down and stood there for a minute. My sister had arranged a public ceremony. The whole county, a live stream. My father on a stage with a microphone, presenting an award for his own decades of service, with her standing next to him. She was going to stand in that gymnasium in front of everyone who had known my father for 30 years and accept the reflected credit. And she was going to hand my father the microphone to do it. I started to laugh. Then I stopped, because I understood exactly what I had to do. None of it was dramatic. First, I filed a motion to be recognized as an interested party in the guardianship proceeding. As my father's adult child, I had standing under the act. The court granted it in 5 days. As part of that filing, I requested the appointment of an independent assessor, a capacity evaluator assigned by the court to determine my father's actual wishes, separate from anything either of us claimed. Second, I bought a ticket to the recognition evening, $50, registered under my full name. Third, I wrote my father a letter and sent it by registered mail, return receipt requested. Not because I thought it would reach him unopened, my sister might intercept it, but because a registered letter creates a postmark, and a postmark is a record, and I wanted whatever I wrote to exist on paper, with a date attached to it, regardless of what happened next. The letter was 3 sentences. I still have the old map. I'm not going to use it without you. When you're ready, I'll follow wherever it leads. The court appointed an independent assessor named Elspeth MacDonald, family law solicitor out of Antigonish, 58 years old, 24 years of doing exactly this kind of work. I found her online, minimal website, no stock photos of smiling families, the kind of practice that doesn't need to market itself. She interviewed my father at the house. My sister was present. She had the right to be, as the named POA agent. The assessment took 45 minutes. Elspeth's report came through the court file, 3 pages. My father presented as oriented, coherent, and able to articulate his preferences clearly. He expressed satisfaction with his current living situation and did not indicate any desire for change in his care arrangements. I set the report down. Then I read the final paragraph under additional observations. The assessor notes that the subject was dressed in a long-sleeved garment for the duration of the visit, despite the ambient indoor temperature exceeding 22 degrees Celsius. When offered the opportunity to remove his outer layer, the subject declined. One sentence, that was what Elspeth MacDonald had seen and couldn't act on. I called her office. She picked up herself. I introduced myself and said directly, "I'm not asking you to take my side. I'm asking one thing. There's a public community event in 4 days, a school recognition ceremony live-streamed, and my father will have a microphone. Would you be willing to attend as a private citizen and simply observe?" She asked what I intended to do. I told her I was going to ask my father one question. There was a long pause on the line. "Mr. Winslow," she said, "if you create a scene, if you give your sister's legal counsel anything to work with, the guardianship hearing becomes a very different conversation. A judge looking at open conflict in a community venue will sometimes hand authority to whoever appears most stable. And stable usually means whoever isn't standing up at a recognition dinner causing a disruption." "I understand. Tell me what the question is," I told her. She was quiet for a long time. I heard her pen against the desk twice. "I'll sit in the back row," she said. "The Colchester District Gymnasium holds 80 folding chairs in standard configuration. I knew because I'd sat in those chairs 9 years earlier, when the school threw my father a retirement send-off. The lighting was the same cool white fluorescent that makes everyone look slightly tired. The walls had photographs going back to the 1970s, graduating classes, sports teams, staff photos. My father was in 3 of them that I could see from my seat. I arrived at 6:40. Phoebe was with me. She wore her dark coat. She looked steadier than I felt. Row 5, aisle seat. Marguerite was 4 rows back. She gave me a small nod. Against the back wall, Elspeth MacDonald, gray blazer, notepad on her knee. At the front table, the principal, the alumni committee chair, my sister, her husband, and my father, first chair, closest to the aisle. He turned around once while they were setting up the podium, just scanning the room the way you do at an event, getting the measure of the space. His eyes found me in row 5. He didn't look surprised. He held my gaze for about 3 seconds. Then he nodded, very slightly, the way he used to nod when I got an answer right on a map quiz. Once, definitive, then moving on. The program started at 7. The principal gave remarks. The alumni chair read the citation. Then my sister went to the microphone. I'll give her this. She was good at it. She talked about the sacrifices, the sleepless nights after his stroke, the appointments and adjustments and things she'd put on hold. The room believed her because she said it with the cadence of truth. Then she said it. She didn't use my name. She said, "Some people disappear when things get hard. They have reasons, always very good reasons. I'm not here to talk about them." A few people near the front glanced toward row 5. She built toward her closing. She talked about family being the only thing that holds when everything else goes sideways. She extended her hand toward the front table. "And now I want to bring up the man who taught half this county how to read a map." The room applauded before my father even stood. He rose slowly. He used the back of the chair for balance, not because he was frail, but because that was what the stroke had taken, certainty in his own footing. He walked to the stage. 3 steps, one hand on the railing. The room kept clapping. The committee chair handed him the mounted plaque. He held it in both hands and looked down at it for a moment. The applause faded. He stood at the microphone. He didn't speak. 5 seconds. 7, 8. My sister began to move toward the stage from the side, hand already reaching forward, already planning to say something. "He's tired. Let's give him a hand." I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my hand the way you raise it when you have a question in a meeting and you're waiting for the floor. The committee chair looked at me, uncertain. "I have one question," I said, "for the recipient." The room went still. I stepped out into the aisle. I stood about 3 meters from the stage. I looked at my father, not at my sister, not at the room, at my father. "Dad." My voice was level. "Do you remember the name of the trail on Blue Mountain, the one where we got turned around?" 7 seconds of silence. I counted everyone. My father looked at my sister. She was very still. Her expression was controlled. Not threatening, not anything you could point to. Just present. Just visible. Then my father set the plaque down on the podium. He reached up with his right hand and pushed back his left sleeve, all the way to the elbow. The mark on his wrist was a reddened band, 3 fingers wide, running in a complete circle around the joint. The skin at the edges was calloused the specific way, skin calloused when something pressed against it repeatedly over weeks. Not a bruise, not an accident, a pattern. The room saw it before anyone spoke. I heard a chair shift somewhere behind me. Someone inhaled sharply. From a few rows back, a voice said something very quiet that I couldn't make out. My father pulled the sleeve back down. He straightened. He picked up the microphone with the steady hands of a man who had spent 31 years settling rooms full of teenagers who didn't want to be there. My name is, well, most of you know my name. I taught here long enough. He waited for the small sound that moved through the room. Some of you still owe me a lab report from 1997. I remember who you are. A few people laughed, uncertain, waiting. My son asked if I remember the trail. I do. Blue Mountain, North Fork. The fog came in and we got turned around. It took us 3 hours. He was 12. He cried when we found the road. So did I, if you remember it correctly. He paused. I remember everything. That's what I need you to understand tonight. I remember everything. The room was completely still. In February, I signed a document. I was 11 days out of hospital, still on blood thinners, and I was frightened, and I did not read it carefully enough. That is my own fault. I want to be clear about that. He looked out over the rows of chairs. Since March, I have not been able to answer my own phone. I have not been permitted to leave the house without accompaniment. On mornings when my son-in-law goes out on errands, I am strapped into my recliner with a chest strap. She tells me it's so I don't fall. He looked at my sister. $47,000. From my RRSP, the one I built over 31 years of not spending money I didn't need to spend. I want to know where it went. I'm still your father. You can tell me in front of these people. 4 seconds of silence. At the back of the room, Elspeth MacDonald rose to her feet. She didn't raise her voice. I am the court-appointed capacity assessor in this guardianship matter. I am an officer of that court. 80 chairs, 80 people turning at once. My sister stepped toward the stage. He's confused. This isn't. The Taya affects his. My father's voice through the microphone. Not loud, absolute. Last Tuesday you asked me for the PIN to my Scotiabank account. You told me it was for the insurance renewal. I gave it to you. I remember the number I gave you. I remember what you were wearing. And I remember the exact words you used. Would you like me to continue? My sister sat back down. Angus came through the side door of the gymnasium. He'd been in the parking lot the whole time. He looked at my sister. She looked at him. The committee chair stood, said something about a short break, and nobody moved. I walked up the 3 steps to the stage. I took off my jacket and laid it over my father's shoulders. He put his arm through mine. He looked at me. North Fork, he said. We should have turned right. I know, I said. We turned right eventually. He nodded once, definitive. It took 4 months to settle, which is fast by any standard. The power of attorney was revoked 12 days after the recognition evening. My father signed the revocation at Elspeth MacDonald's office in Antigonish, with her present as a neutral witness. My sister was not in the building. The guardianship petition was dismissed. The judge's written decision included a line I've read more than once. The petitioner demonstrated a consistent pattern of restricting the subject's access to family and community conduct which is fundamentally irreconcilable with the petitioner's stated position as a protective caregiver. The forensic accountant found $47,200 withdrawn from my father's RRSP over 7 months, in amounts structured to stay below the reporting threshold. A civil judgment was entered against my sister for full repayment over 8 years, with interest. My brother-in-law's real estate license was referred to the Nova Scotia Real Estate Commission for disciplinary review on grounds of conflict of interest, listing a property while acting under power of attorney for its owner. The criminal charge was financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult under Nova Scotia's Adult Protection Act. My sister entered a guilty plea. The sentence was suspended with 2 years of supervised probation and a lifetime prohibition from acting in any fiduciary capacity, trustee, executor, POA holder. She cannot sign for anyone again. The reverse mortgage application, which had been in progress for 6 weeks without my father's knowledge, was cancelled. My father moved back into full legal authority over his own affairs 8 days after the gala. 6 employees at my brother-in-law's property staging company lost their jobs when he lost his license. I think about them. I think I couldn't have done anything differently, but I think about them. The provincial crown prosecutor called me 6 weeks after the gala. They had the evidence for a custodial sentence if I was willing to advocate for one. I drove to their office on a Tuesday, sat across from an assistant crown attorney who had clearly worked these cases before. She had a legal pad and she was ready. I told her I'd testify to every fact I'd documented. I would not ask for additional time. She looked up from the pad. My father still wants his daughter at Christmas, I said. He told me that 2 weeks ago. He's angry, he has every right to be. But he's 78 years old and she is his child, and he has to live with whatever I do in that courtroom. I can't use a sentencing hearing to finish an argument. That's not why I started this. She wrote something on the legal pad. I don't know what. The first time my father and I sat alone at his kitchen table, no legal matter pending, no other appointment expected, was a Sunday in December, his kitchen. The map drawers were back in the study, retrieved from the storage unit where they'd been put. His peacoat was back on the coat rack. He made tea. We sat down. There was a half-finished crossword on the table. He pushed it aside to make room for the mugs. He said, I need to ask you something. Okay. When I asked about the map, in February, he wrapped both hands around his mug. Did you understand what I meant? I told him the truth. I said I didn't understand at the time. I wrote it down because I didn't understand it. I understood it later. He nodded slowly. I didn't know what else to do. She had the phone most of the time. I thought if I told you the map was still out there. If you knew I was still thinking about it. He stopped, backed up, found the other route. I didn't want you to stop looking. I said, I kept it the whole time. I never used it. He looked at me for a long moment. I know, he said. I got your letter. He went to the hall closet. He came back with the envelope. It had been opened carefully, the flap folded back along the original seam. The paper inside was worn at the creases, the way paper gets when it's been unfolded and refolded many times. He set it on the table. I didn't need to read it, but I looked at the paper anyway. I still have the old map. I'm not going to use it without you. When you're ready, I'll follow wherever it leads. He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and set a key on the table in front of me. Brass, new cut, still sharp at the edges. I had the locks changed, he said. This is yours. I looked at it. Then I reached into my jacket and put the map tube on the table between us. He looked at it. He reached out and touched the cardboard without opening it. The North Fork, he said. The North Fork, I said. He picked up the tube, carried it to the study. I heard the wide flat drawer slide open, then closed. When he came back, he sat down and picked up the crossword. He slid a pencil across to me. We worked in silence for a while. He was slower on the across clues, still quick on the down. The tea went cold. Neither of us moved to make more. It's April now. My father turned 79 in March. We had a small party, Phoebe, Marguerite, a few people from his old staff circle. One former student, a woman who now teaches at the same high school, brought him a laminated topographic map from a trail in Cape Breton and told him she still had the field notebook from his class in 1991. He spent 20 minutes quizzing her on contour intervals. She passed everyone. He's back in the garden every morning. He wears a fleece vest in the colder weeks, long sleeves when there's still a chill in the ground. But by the first Saturday of April, he was out there in a t-shirt, turning the soil along the east fence where the new bed is going in. I come on Sundays, I ring the bell, he opens the door. My sister is permitted to write letters. My father reads them. He writes back when he feels like it. He told me once that he doesn't know if he'll ever fully understand what happened, and that he's made peace with not understanding it, and that those are two different things, not understanding and not forgiving. He said his own father had taught him the difference a long time ago. Last Sunday I came up the walk at 10 and rang the bell, and he opened the door in his housecoat with his tea, and he said, 6 down, 4 letters, cartographer's reference line. I sat at the kitchen table. He slid the Times across. I said, I don't know, Dad. I think I'd leave that one. He laughed. He picked up his pencil and filled in the letters himself. Grid. He set the pencil down. You always were faster on the ground than on paper. He looked at me. That's not an insult. I know, I said. He made more tea. We sat there with the crossword between us and the map in its drawer in the next room, exactly where it belongs.